East China Sea, January 1945. Depth 280 feet. Pressure 12 tons per square inch. Inside the submarine, USS Barb, 80 men breathed the same recycled air thick with sweat oil and the metallic scent of tension. The lights were dimmed to red. Every sound mattered. Every breath counted. Sonar contact whispered Seaman First Class Lee. Bearing 270. Multiple screws slow moving. Convoy speed. Commander Eugene B. Fluckey leaned over the chart table, his face a calm mask under the crimson light.
Fire 1.
His eyes traced the bearings like a chess player mapping inevitability. Merchant convoy, he said
Fire
softly.
2.
Probably 2 escorts. He paused, then turned to his crew. Gentlemen, we're going in. No one cheered. No one moved. They'd done this too many times to need words. Rig for silent running, Fluckey ordered. The engine room fell quiet as the main motors throttled down. The hum dropped to a whisper. Even conversation ceased. Only the faint ping of enemy sonar pulsed through the steel hull, rhythmic, patient, predatory. In the control room, the helmsman's hands were slick on the wheel. The boat drifted through black water, hunting by sound alone. Through the periscope,
Sing for me, sweetheart.
Fluckey saw nothing but shadows and starlight reflected on distant swells. Above them, somewhere in that vast emptiness,
out here.
Japanese ships were crawling across the surface, oblivious to the predator below. Torpedo tubes 1 through 6, ready came the quiet call from the forward compartment. Fluckey's voice stayed calm, almost conversational. Set depth 10 feet. Magnetic exploders armed. His executive officer, Lieutenant Max Shepard, whispered, "We'll be in knife range, Skipper." Exactly where I like it. At 23:48, Barb came to periscope depth. The sea outside was a desert of darkness. Fluckey raised the periscope one last time and saw it a faint line of ships silhouetted against moonlight. Cargo vessels, tankers, 2 destroyer escorts slicing through the water ahead. He marked bearings fast, voice clipped steady. Target 1 tanker mid-column, fire 1, fire 2. The sub jolted gently as the torpedoes left their tubes, white wakes invisible in the night. Fluckey lowered the periscope. The seconds that followed were eternal. 45 seconds to impact, whispered Shepard. Men watched the stopwatch. No one spoke. No one breathed. The ocean held its breath with them. Then thoom! The first explosion ripped through the sea. A second followed, then a third, a chain of rolling thunder that shook the hull. The submarine rocked under the shockwave. Overhead the sea flashed white, the tanker breaking apart in flame. Hit confirmed. Fluckey allowed himself a brief grim smile. Downscope. Dive to 400 feet. The destroyers had already begun their run. The sonar operator's hands trembled as new pings echoed through the water, closer, faster. "They've got us," someone muttered. "They think they do," said Fluckey. Then came the first depth charge. A dull crack followed by another closer, then 20 more in rapid succession. Lights flickered. Tools rattled. A pipe split in the aft compartment, spraying steam. "Hold her steady," Fluckey said calmly. "They're guessing." The crew waited motionless, listening as the destroyers circled above. Every sound was a threat, every heartbeat a countdown. And then slowly the pings began to fade. The destroyers turned away, deceived by silence. The crew exhaled as one. Fluckey checked his watch, then said quietly, "Gentlemen, that's 1 more convoy they won't be sending to Manila." The men grinned in the dim light. No shouting, no celebration. Just a deep, wordless pride. In the stillness, the sonar man whispered half to himself, "Down here, nobody knows your name. But history will hear the echo." Inside a fleet submarine, there was no day and no night, only watcher's duty and the steady pulse of machinery. The crew of the USS Barb lived by sound, the soft churn of propellers, the whisper of valves, the occasional angry heartbeat of sonar pings. Even sleep had a rhythm broken by alarms that could turn dreams into panic in a single second. Life aboard was measured in inches. 80 men shared a steel tube, barely 300 feet long. Their bunks were stacked like coffins, their air thick with diesel sweat and coffee. When the galley cooked beans, the smell haunted the boat for days. Yet somehow, inside that claustrophobic cage, there was laughter. Chief Red O'Hara tuned the engines like a violinist, talking to them in Irish curses and affection. "Come on, sweetheart," he'd mutter, "just 1 more knot." Radio man Lee tapped out messages to Pearl Harbor with deliberate care, knowing that each letter could summon rescue or death.
Tanker, mid-column.
Between shifts, he read Moby Dick by the glow of a single bulb.
Fire one.
Same ocean, he'd saved different hunters. At 0400, the Barb surfaced to recharge batteries. The hatch opened and salt air flooded through the control room. Men climbed to the bridge for a few minutes of real air stars, blazing above a calm black sea. Commander Fluckey stood there, wind in his face, binoculars sweeping the horizon. "We're ghosts out here," he said quietly. "Let's keep it that way." By dawn, radar picked up a faint trace merchant vessels in line ahead. Fluckey studied the echo, then smiled slightly. Convoy 8 ships, 2 escorts, range 20,000 yards. Prepare to attack. Down below, the crew moved like muscle memory torpedoes, checked gyros, set valves, sealed. The boat slipped under again, disappearing into its element. Hours passed in tension. The sonar's ping became the heartbeat of the boat. Every man knew that the distance between predator and prey was shrinking second by second. Standby tubes 1 through 6 came the command. Torpedo Officer Carter, young and pale, wiped his palms on his uniform. His first engagement had left him shaking. Now his eyes were steady. "Ready, Captain." "Fire 1. The torpedo whooshed away in visible death, racing through darkness. Then another, and another. 45 seconds. Silence. Then the sea convulsed. A transport erupted in a fireball. Another listed hard to port, spilling men into the burning water. "2 hits," shouted O'Hara. "That'll do," Fluckey said. "Take her deep." Destroyers responded instantly. Their screws thundered overhead. Sonar pings turned frantic. Depth charges coming, someone called. The world exploded. The hull shook as water compressed under blasts. Light bulbs burst. Gauges danced wildly. One explosion hit close enough to lift the stern clear off alignment. In the control room, pipes screamed, steam hissed, and a wrench clattered to the deck. "Hold her," Fluckey barked. "Keep her level steady, damn it." The Barb groaned like a living thing, but held. For 2 hours, the Japanese destroyers hunted them, dropping patterns of explosives, listening, circling, dropping again. The crew whispered prayers, each man locked in his private fear. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sea went quiet. The destroyers moved on, fooled by a decoy noisemaker, drifting away in the current. Only when silence returned did men begin to breathe again. O'Hara wiped oil from his face. "They'll write love songs about this boat," he said. Fluckey gave him a thin smile. "Let's make sure someone's alive to sing them." Above them, unseen, the wreckage of the convoy burned through the night, distant fires marking the path of the silent hunters. The Pacific War was fought on 2 oceans, one of sunlight and banners, the other of darkness and pressure. While carrier task forces drew the headlines, the real strangulation of Japan happened beneath the surface. It was a war of arithmetic. Tons of shipping sunk barrels of oil, denied days until starvation. In 1941, Japan's empire stretched from Burma to the Solomons. It looked vast, but it was hollow, held together by merchant routes that fed the homeland with coal oil and rice. Every convoy that left Singapore or the Dutch East Indies was an artery. The American submarine force, barely 2% of the Navy's personnel, became the scalpel. At first, it was a blunted tool. The Mark 14 torpedo ran too deep and often failed to explode. Crews risked their lives for empty bubbles. Fluckey and others fought Washington's bureaucracy as fiercely as any destroyer, demanding fixes that finally came in 1943. After that, the ocean changed character. Submarines moved from ambush to domination. They prowled Japan's home waters, mining harbours, intercepting tankers and sinking convoys faster than shipyards could replace them. Radar knew sonar and radar warning receivers turned steel tubes into intelligent predators. By 1944, the effect was visible from orbit if there had been satellites then. Japan's industrial output dropped by half. Fuel reserves bled away.
Tanker,
Factories closed, ships sat empty, at anchor cities went dark. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Fleet, wrote simply, "We have driven them back to their islands, and soon even their islands will starve." It was war reduced to invisible geometry lines of trade cut by points of silence. The statistics are cold but absolute. 1,300 Japanese merchant ships destroyed. 2/3 of Japan's merchant tonnage gone. 55% of all Japanese losses credited to submarines. But behind each number was a crew sweating in darkness, listening to the creak of the hull and the tick of oxygen gauges. The surface admirals had their fleets, their salutes, their music. The men below had only the knowledge that every successful patrol shortened the war by days. And so the unseen war became the most efficient, least visible campaign in naval history, won not by firepower, but by patience, math, and silence. The Pacific didn't roar in victory. It just grew quieter. The deeper a boat went, the more she spoke. Metal popped and sighed, bolts flexed like bones. Every sound reminded the men how thin the skin between life and water really was. Commander Eugene Fluckey walked that narrow frontier with a smile that unnerved even his veterans. He was 33 compact with clear eyes and a calm that seemed to bend the pressure outward instead of inward. He had a rule: no fear jokes, no panic talk. If we die, he said, once we'll die professionals. To his crew, he was part gambler, part father. He read patrol reports like poetry and treated risk as a form of art. Luck favours the bold, he'd tell his exec. But bold doesn't mean stupid unless it works. When orders came to patrol near the Formosa Strait, most captains would have turned cautious. Japanese air patrols were thick sonar nets everywhere. Fluckey only grinned. If they expect us at night, we'll visit at noon. Below him, the crew kept their own rituals against the dark. Chief Red O'Hara, in the engine room bare-chested, sang Irish sea songs to the diesels. He swore it made them run smoother. Ensign Carter still carried a dented coin from his first patrol. He rubbed it before every dive. "If this hull holds, so does the coin," he'd whisper. Radio man Lee filled a small notebook with fragments of home Chinese characters, addresses a single photograph of his mother taken before the occupation. Between messages, he would trace the outlines, then fold the page like a prayer. Life inside the Barb was a cycle of routine and sudden violence. One moment, coffee cups floated weightless during a crash dive. The next silence returned, and men drifted into exhausted half-sleep, their bodies learning to rest amid alarm bells. On good days, they surfaced to charge batteries and watch the horizon turn gold. Someone would fry powdered eggs. Someone else would patch a valve with chewing gum and luck. The sea air felt unreal after the canned breath of the deep. Fluckey rarely spoke of fear. But one night while checking the forward torpedo room, he paused beside O'Hara and said quietly, "It's not courage that keeps us going. It's discipline pretending not to be afraid." O'Hara nodded. "Then we're the best pretenders afloat." The men laughed softly, and for a moment the submarine felt almost human. They all knew what waited outside the cold, the pressure, the enemy. But inside the Barb, they built something rare, trust strong enough to breathe through silence. It was that trust that would carry them toward their most audacious mission, yet one that would take the war ashore where no submarine had ever dared to go. January 1945. Sakhalin Coast, Japanese home waters. Night had no stars. The sea was glass. The USS Barb floated just beneath the surface periscope, barely breaking the skin of the water. On the bridge, Commander Fluckey studied the faint outline of the shoreline. Black trees, darker cliffs, and behind them, the faint flicker of distant lamps. Somewhere beyond those lights, a railway line ran along the coast, a supply artery for troops and fuel heading toward the north. Fluckey had spotted it through binoculars days before. Now he intended to cut it not with torpedoes, but with his own hands. He turned to his officers. "Gentlemen," he said, "tonight we'll do something no submarine has ever done. We're going ashore." There was a stunned silence. Skipper O'Hara said slowly, "You mean walk?" Fluckey grinned. "We've sunk ships, raided harbours, dodged depth charges. Why stop there?" He gathered a small team, 8 volunteers. Demolition men, quiet
Hold her
types.
steady!
They packed explosives, fuses, a single carbine, and a bag of luck. At 2300 hours, Barb surfaced in the shallows. The air was cold enough to freeze breath. The men climbed into rubber boats, paddling toward the black shoreline under a moon so thin it seemed afraid to shine. The sea hissed against the rocks. The beach smelled of pine and
Sing
diesel.
for me, sweetheart.
Every sound was amplified, the click of oars, the crunch of boots on wet sand, the rasp of breath through cloth.
We're ghosts out here.
They
Let's keep
moved
it
like
that way.
ghosts. Half a mile inland, they found the railway, two steel lines gleaming faintly in the starlight. "Train's due just before dawn," whispered Lee, checking his watch. Fluckey knelt by the track, his hand steady. He unpacked a small explosive with a pressure trigger designed to detonate beneath the train's weight. "Simple," he said softly. "Elegant." They worked in silence, laying the charge, testing the wire. Each minute felt like a lifetime. Then, in the distance, a whistle, the faint rumble of steel on steel. "Time to go," Fluckey murmured. They sprinted back through the reeds, stumbling over roots, the sound of the train growing louder behind them, engines grinding, wheels screaming. The first car crossed the trigger. The night exploded. A pillar of flame and steel shot into the sky as the train disintegrated in a single massive blast. The echo rolled across the hills like thunder. Burning fragments rained into the surf. "Jesus," Carter whispered, watching from the shoreline. "We actually did it." Fluckey only smiled, eyes fixed on the blaze. "Let's not hang around to admire our work." They paddled back to Barb Hart's pounding laughter bubbling up through exhaustion. As the hatch closed behind them, O'Hara turned to the captain. "You think anyone's going to believe this?" "No," Fluckey said. "That's why we wrote it down." Within hours, the submarine vanished into open water. Behind them, the coast burned a single scar, marking where war had touched the Japanese homeland. In his patrol report, Fluckey described the raid in one line. "Conducted successful shore operation. One freight train destroyed." It was a masterpiece of understatement, the only time in World War II that American sailors invaded Japan itself. History would remember it as the Barb's train raid, part legend, part lunacy and pure audacity. And for those 8 men, it would remain the one night when silence itself went ashore to fight. When the Barb surfaced again in daylight, the ocean looked almost innocent. The men gathered on deck faces, wind-burned eyes hollow with fatigue. Somewhere beyond the horizon, their target still burned. There was no cheer, only the slow rhythm of diesel engines carrying them home. Commander Fluckey wrote the patrol log in his neat hand. "Sank 6 ships, destroyed 1 train, expended all torpedoes. Crew excellent. No hint of fear. No mention of the hours hiding under depth-charge barrages or of the men who had aged 10 years in 10 patrols." The silent service measured heroism in understatement. Across the Pacific, other submarines waged the same invisible campaign. They prowled the Luzon Strait, the Yellow Sea, the Sea of Japan, cutting supply lines one convoy at a time. By the spring of 1945, Japan's lifelines were gone. Factories starved for fuel, cities went dark. The empire was an island again. The cost was high. 52 American submarines never returned. More than 3,500 men were lost, entombed in their boats forever, 1 in every 5 who sailed. No bugle called for them. The sea kept their names. When victory came, the surface fleets steamed into Tokyo Bay to the sound of brass bands. The submariners watched from the edges, hands in pockets, content with silence. Their war had ended the way it began, unseen. Admiral Charles Lockwood called them the eyes and the claws of the Pacific. Others called them ghosts.
Fire 1.
They called themselves simply the crew. At a reunion years later, one survivor raised a glass and
Fire
said,
2.
"We fought where no one could see us, and that's all right. Because every ship we sank saved lives we'll never know." The USS Barb was decommissioned soon after the war, its hull cut for scrap. But in the deep archives of the Navy, the patrol reports remain lines of type that read like heartbeat traces on a forgotten machine. Numbers and dates devoid of drama, yet behind each one lay the same truth. Victory without witnesses is still victory. I still hear it sometimes, the sound the ocean makes when it's holding its breath. Down there below the sunlight, you learn what silence really is. It isn't
Sing
peace,
for me,
it's
sweetheart.
pressure, it's weight. It's the world reminding you that you don't belong. We used to joke that courage was just good manners under
We're
depth-charged
ghosts out
fire.
here. Let's keep it that way.
Truth is, courage was breathing quietly when every part of you wanted to scream. The surface sailors had flags, photographs, and newsreels. We had steel, sweat, and trust. Every sound we made could be the one that gave us away: a dropped wrench, a cough, a heartbeat too loud. But when the ping stopped, when the water went still, we knew we'd won another day. No parades, no glory, just survival. Sometimes when I stand by the sea now, I wonder if it remembers us, the men who hunted in silence, who died without witnesses, who made the ocean itself a weapon. Maybe it does. Maybe every quiet wave carries an echo, the sound of the Barb, rising through the dark engines, humming low, heading home to a world that never knew how close it came to losing us.